what's in this report, and understanding that the report was constrained, the FBI was constrained in who they could talk to and how long they had to conduct this inquiry. It's not even really an investigation, right? It's an inquiry because they had no subpoena power. They couldn't compel anybody to come and talk to them. All they could do was ask questions of people that made themselves available to the FBI and ask them questions related only to the accusations, as far as I understand, of Dr. Ford against Judge Brett Kavanaugh.
Right. So this is what's really interesting. Is we don't know specifically what the White House told them, right? What Don McGahn suggested were the limitations. We know that they did not speak to Grassley Ford. They did not speak to Kavanaugh, but they did speak to a second accuser, Deborah Ramirez. But she says she gave them a list of people to talk to corroborate her story, which is that at a party while they were at Yale, Brett Kavanaugh exposed himself to her. She says that no one on her list was contacted by the FBI.
Right.
And we know that, like I said earlier, that 10 people were contacted by the FBI, and they managed to interview 9 of those people. This was supposed to be sort of a week to do this investigation. It's less than a week.
It's been less than a week.
It's really just been a few days. So I don't know just how much the FBI could really dig up. And so here we are, right? There's a vote planned for tomorrow.
Right. And again, to reiterate a fine point, which is that the investigation and the inquiry, as I understood it, was specifically around the allegations of Dr. Ford and Deborah Ramirez. But, for example, yesterday, for the first time, we heard from Judge Kavanaugh's roommate at Yale, James Roche. He essentially came out on the record in an interview with CNN and said that he had sort of kept his own counsel over the course of these investigations, but finally came forward to say that Brett Kavanaugh lied under oath about his drinking and the meaning of the words in his yearbook. That was not part of the purview of the FBI investigation. So here is Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, and Dianne Feinstein, the ranking Judiciary Committee member.
Then the Democratic leader will make a brief statement, and I'm not going to take any questions.
Nor am I.
At 9 o'clock this morning, my staff and I reviewed the FBI's report into sexual assault allegations against Brett Kavanaugh. Let me be clear, I can't talk about the detail because this remains a confidential part of the background report. I hope that changes are made and we'll be able to talk more about what the FBI did later. But what I can say is that the most notable part of this report is what's not in it. As we noted by the White House, the FBI did not interview Brett Kavanaugh, nor did the FBI interview Dr. Blasey Ford. What we've heard from numerous people over the last few days seeking to provide information to the FBI. We have seen even more press reports of witnesses who wanted to speak with the FBI but were not interviewed. Deborah Ramirez's lawyer said he was unaware of any corroborating witnesses who were interviewed. Candidly, what we reviewed today in a very limited time, I was there, I had to leave, the report is in parts, and I had the opportunity to read some, but not all of it. It looks to be a product of an incomplete investigation that was limited, perhaps by the White House, I don't know. But the White House certainly blocked access to millions of documents from Judge Kavanaugh's record, I know that, and ensured that 90% of his emails and memos weren't available for the Senate or the public in the hearings. It now appears that they also blocked the FBI from doing its job. Democrats agreed that the investigation scope should be limited. We did not agree that the White House should tie the FBI's hands. It's simply not credible to say that public testimony in last week's hearing is a substitute for interviews by FBI agents. Not only do senators lack the expertise of FBI agents, we were only given 5 minutes to question Judge Kavanaugh. So, in my view, from what I saw, the investigation was very limited, And it will be interesting after all of the members have an opportunity to read the documents. And we have an opportunity in public to discuss our conclusions, what the findings are.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. I just have 3 points to make. One, we had many fears that this was a very limited process that would constrain the FBI from getting all the facts. Having received a thorough briefing on the documents, those fears have been realized. Second, I disagree. Having received a briefing on all of the documents, I disagree with Senator Grassley's statement that there was no hint of misconduct. And third, we are reiterating our call, given how limited these documents were and how limited the scope of this investigation was. We are reiterating our call that the documents with proper redaction be made public. Why shouldn't all of America see the facts? And second, we are reiterating our call to make the directive that the White House and Counsel McGahn sent to the FBI public, because we believe it greatly constrained the investigation from the get-go. The fact that there's only one document in there for 100 senators is another example of constraining the ability of all senators and the American public to see the whole truth and nothing but. Thank you.
Senator, what do you mean that you disagree with Senator Grassley's statement that there's no hint of misconduct? Senator?
All right, so you just heard from the Democrat leadership there, including Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, and Chuck Schumer, who's the minority leader. Caitlin Huey Burns is here with us at the table. It's sort of what we expected, I think, Caitlin. I think we expected that there was not going to be enough time to review the documents. That's what Senator Feinstein said. And what we heard from Chuck Schumer is that he fundamentally disagrees with the statement that Senator Grassley put out, which says in that statement, Anne-Marie, you had it.
It says that, these uncorroborated accusations have been unequivocally and repeatedly rejected by Judge Kavanaugh, and it says that neither the Judiciary Committee nor the FBI could locate any third parties who can attest to any of these allegations.
So that's
we should
essentially
also point out that Nancy Cordes was in the room, and we're going to talk to her a little bit later. You can see her; she's got a nice picture of she's getting ready.
So what's interesting about that is that they can't share the details of this confidential inquiry, but that's the only hint that Chuck Schumer says. Or at least what he is saying to the public is that what Senator Grassley says is perhaps not everything that people need to know.
Right. I think we need to take a step back and just consider how remarkable this is. That this is the Senate Judiciary Committee, a traditional bipartisan committee, and the way in which they have been operating virtually in two different lanes is just pretty remarkable given the substance of what they are dealing with here. We're talking, again, about a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. So we're going to see this all day. We're going to see Republicans come out and say one thing and Democrats come out and say another. Right now, we just heard from the Democrats that they are very concerned about the scope.
Leader McConnell is speaking. Let's listen.
Reputation for integrity and demonstrate the capacity for sound judicial temperament. This is the nonpartisan test that my friend, the Democratic leader, among others, used to call the gold standard. Well, Judge Kavanaugh passed that with flying colors. So to be clear, this seal of approval comes from the ABA's Standing Committee on the Federal Judiciary, an independent entity within the organization. Even after the ABA's president tried to play politics with the nomination last week, the Standing Committee reaffirmed its rating yet again. Unanimously well qualified. That's Brett Kavanaugh. So, Mr. President, how did we end up where we are today? How did we get here? How did we get from a chorus of expert praise and professional respect to wild tales of violent gangs, sexual assault rings, fistfights on boats in Rhode Island harbors, and the possibility, get this, of an argument in a college bar? An argument in a college bar? Several weeks ago, a confidential allegation of misconduct from nearly 40 years ago was leaked to the press. Since then, other allegations have poured forth. Many were just patently ridiculous. Feeding frenzy of ridiculous accusations. But while some cheered on the feeding frenzy for political purposes, Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley and his staff rolled up their sleeves and went to work. They promptly investigated the varied allegations that materialized at the last minute. Chairman Grassley reopened the public hearing so Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh could speak directly to those claims under oath. That was after, by the way, he offered Dr. Ford the option to tell her story at any place of her choosing, either here or in California, either in public or in private, either with staff or with members, an offer that, according to Dr. Ford's testimony, was seemingly never actually communicated to her by her lawyers, despite a professional requirement to do so. Now, of course, the FBI has completed a supplemental background investigation and delivered its results to us here in the Senate. Mr. President, this is now the 7th time the FBI has thoroughly reviewed Judge Kavanaugh's background. 7 FBI investigations. So what have we learned? What are the facts and the evidence tell us after 7 FBI investigations? The fact is that these allegations have not been corroborated. None of the allegations have been corroborated by the 7th FBI investigation. Not in the new FBI investigation, not anywhere. So none of these last-minute allegations have been corroborated, as is confirmed by the 7th and latest FBI investigation. As Chairman Grassley stated this morning, neither the Judiciary Committee nor the FBI could locate any third parties who can attest to any of these allegations. No backup from any witnesses, including those specifically named as eyewitnesses by the people who brought the allegations in the first place. Let me say that again. No backup from any witnesses, including those specifically named as eyewitnesses by the people who brought these allegations. In addition, one person has completely recanted their whole wild story. Another accuser went on television and backpedaled from many of their own ridiculous charges. So the facts do not support the allegations levied at Judge Kavanaugh's character. Instead, many of the facts actually support Judge Kavanaugh's strong, unequivocal denial, which he repeatedly stated to committee investigators under penalty of felony, which he firmly restated under oath last Thursday before the full committee and the American people, which aligns with the testimony of hundreds, literally hundreds of character witnesses who've known him over the years. For goodness sake, this is the United States of America. Nobody is supposed to be guilty until proven innocent in this country. Nobody is supposed to be guilty until proven innocent in the United States of America. The Senate should not set a fundamentally un-American precedent here. Judge Kavanaugh's right to basic fairness does not disappear just because some disagree with his judicial philosophy. Our society is not a place where uncorroborated allegations of misconduct from nearly 40 years ago, allegations which are vigorously disputed, can nullify someone's career or destroy their reputation. Is that what the Senate's going to be known for? Your nomination comes up here, and we destroy your reputation. That's what the Senate is going to participate in? So above the partisan noise, beyond this shameful spectacle, which is an embarrassment to the Senate, what will endure are the actual facts before us. The actual facts. Upon reviewing them, only one question is left for us to answer. Is Judge Brett Kavanaugh qualified to serve on the United States Supreme Court? Well, Mr. President, there's a good reason the political opponents of this nomination have never wanted to litigate that issue. Oh, no. They don't want to talk about that. There's a good reason why they let the politics of personal destruction run away ahead of the facts in an effort to dodge that very good question. Because Brett Kavanaugh is stunningly and totally qualified for this job. We already know this, but for starters, his academic and legal credentials are second to none. From Yale with honors, then on to Yale Law School, then came not one, not two, but 3 clerkships in our nation's federal courts, ending up with Justice Kennedy. His career continued with work in the Office of Independent Counsel and the Office of White House Counsel, and that was only the beginning. For the last 12 years, Brett Kavanaugh has served on what is widely considered the second highest court in our land, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, written more than 300 judicial opinions. Several have formed the basis of later rulings by the Supreme Court itself. The litany of accomplishments is a fact. A fact. It's a matter of public record. But just as telling are all the accounts of Judge Brett Kavanaugh, the person, that have been volunteered by those who've known him every step of the way over the years. We've heard from literally hundreds of character witnesses who heaped praise on the Brett Kavanaugh they know. The loyal friend and teammate, the standout student, the talented, hardworking colleague, the brilliant legal writer, the respectful role model and mentor, particularly to women, the devoted husband, father, and coach. These letters and recorded testimony were offered by men and women with nothing to gain for themselves. They were just glad to tell the truth about a nominee who they know possesses the character, temperament, and qualifications for this important job. Judge Kavanaugh's professors and others who knew him at Yale describe a true intellectual, a leading thinker, a wonderful mentor and leader. One goes so far as saying, it's hard to name anyone with judicial credentials as strong as those of Judge Kavanaugh. His former law clerks, in full-throated support, say that Judge Kavanaugh's work ethic flows from a fundamental humility. They say he gives unflinching, honest advice and listens carefully to the views of his colleagues and clerks, even when they differ from his own. Peers here in Washington of all political persuasions haven't minced their words either. They deem him, quote, unquestionably qualified by his extraordinary intellect, experience, and temperament, and warn the Senate not to miss this opportunity to, quote, put such a strong advocate for decency and civility on our nation's highest court. So, Mr. President, let's not lose sight of the opportunity before us. This process has been ruled by fear and anger and underhanded gamesmanship for too long. Time for us to stand up to this kind of thing. We owe it to the American people not to be intimidated by these tactics. We owe it to the American people to underscore that you're innocent until proven guilty. It's the Senate that's on trial here, Mr. President. What kind of image will we convey to the public? Can we be scared by all these people rampaging through the halls, accosting members at airports, coming to their homes? They're trying to intimidate the Senate into defeating a good man. Are we going to allow this to happen in this country? So, we will not pretend that partisan histrionics take away the basic fairness that every American deserves. We will not be hoodwinked by those who have tried hard to smear this good man, to drag him through the mud. And when that didn't work, they turned on a dime and started claiming his real sin was that he spoke up too forcefully in defense of his good name and his family. Oh, they decided he didn't have a judicial temperament because he aggressively defended his good name against this outrageous smear conducted in conjunction with Senate Democrats. Who among us would not have been outraged by having a lifetime record dragged through the mud with accusations that cannot be proven? And a blatant attempt to decide on the part of at least some Senate Democrats that the presumption of innocence no longer applies in this country. What kind of person couldn't have been upset about that? They claim he spoke too forcefully in defense of himself after being accused of such outrageous behavior that cannot be proven. I admire him for standing up for himself and standing up for his family. I'd be shocked if it were not done in an aggressive fashion. For goodness sake. So let's reclaim this moment for what it should be: a chance to elevate a stunningly talented and impressive jurist to an important office for which he is so well qualified, so completely and totally qualified. A golden opportunity to give our great nation precisely the kind of brilliant, fair-minded, and collegial Supreme Court justice that the court deserves. This, Mr. President, is the good that senators will have an opportunity to do. We have a chance to do good here and to underscore the basic tenet of fairness in our country. So I filed cloture on the nomination yesterday evening, and I'll be proud to vote to advance this nomination tomorrow. said before.
All right, so we have been just listening to the majority leader in the Senate talk. And so we heard previously, though, from Chuck Grassley. We heard from the Democrats their reaction to the FBI expanded investigation. And Nancy Cordes was in that room at the time. Nancy, you're joining us now from Capitol Hill. You know, we're hearing sort of arguments that we expected from both sides of the aisle in regards to this FBI document and whether it sheds light or whether it doesn't. But just sort of remind us what we heard from Chuck Schumer just moments ago.
Well, it was very interesting because he wouldn't take any questions from us, but he sort of tantalizingly said that without going into any details, Democrats don't agree with the conclusion by the White House and Chuck Grassley, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, that there's essentially nothing to see in this FBI report and that there isn't anything in there to corroborate Christine Blasey Ford's claims. Leader Schumer came out here and said, we disagree with Senator Grassley's statement that there is no hint of misconduct in this FBI report. Now, the challenge is that because these senators are really prohibited from speaking publicly about what is contained in the FBI report, we really don't know what he's referring to. So it's very difficult to judge what he's saying and what Grassley is saying about the conclusions that one would reach if they were able to read this FBI report, which is sort of under lock and key right now. It's in a room in the Capitol basement where senators can only file in and get a briefing from certain approved staffers. They're able to look at this document, but they can't take it out of the room. And so all of this is being done to make sure that we don't have access to it, that we aren't able to see certain details from that report and not others. But it obviously makes it very difficult to know exactly what the FBI did find in those 10 or so interviews that agents were allowed to conduct.
So, Nancy, and I'll just point out that Caitlin Huey-Burns is with us here at the table. But so I know that reporters have been staking out senators, and as Anne-Marie pointed out, we heard from the majority leader, we heard from the minority leader, but I think what people want to hear, or who people want to hear from, are those three key senators: Susan Collins, Jeff Flake, Lisa Murkowski, and perhaps folks like Joe Manchin. What have we heard, if anything, from their staffs, from those senators, as to what they've seen, what they've read in the report, and how they feel now that this investigation is complete?
We have heard exactly nothing, Vlad. We did see Senator Collins go into the room where the FBI report is being held, but we haven't heard anything from her or from those other senators you mentioned since then. You know, the reality is that for these senators, they have every interest in making it appear that they're making a very reasoned decision based on what they view in that report. So it doesn't behoove them to walk right out of there and make a statement one way or the other about whether they think that the FBI's information is compelling, whether they were moved by it one way or the other. They have basically held out this long, despite all of our repeated questions for them about where they stand. So it's not surprising that they'll probably hold out at least a day longer until the Senate is set to take that procedural vote that you just heard the Senate's Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, talk about on the Senate floor, setting up a final confirmation vote on Saturday.
Nancy, it's Caitlin. You know this Congress better than anybody. I wonder what you're making of what this means for Mitch McConnell. It's been fascinating to watch him on the Senate floor these past few days, using some pretty passionate rhetoric
Sorry,
in
Caitlin, we
his
actually.
terms.
There's the shot, you saw the shot go down. It showed a shot of the Capitol building.
Okay.
And we just
And I really wanted to hear her response.
I know, me
because
too.
We have been talking about how active and for McConnell, how verbose and passionate, if you will, he's been, right?
Right. Yeah. And so, you know, my question is kind of what this means for him and how he's calculating this, right? He's not only...
Okay, so Nancy's back. So go ahead. Finish your thought.
Thanks, Nancy. I
just wanted to keep you guys on your toes.
Mission accomplished.
Just the way in which Mitch McConnell is thinking about this. He's obviously the Senate Majority Leader, but he's also paying attention so closely to all these Senate races. He knows them inside and out. And kind of what this means in terms of his legacy, the idea of being able to get another justice through. Can you talk a little bit about how he's kind of factoring this all in and what this means for him?
Sure. Well, I think that there is a sense here on Capitol Hill that Mitch McConnell may be on the verge of pulling off a kind of hat trick jujitsu move here, where if he is able to keep all of his Republican conference together and confirm Judge Kavanaugh, then he would have, A, managed to steer the Senate through this very contentious process and keep his party together, get Kavanaugh confirmed, and at the same time energize a lot of Republican voters who weren't all that fired up, according to polls, going into the midterm elections. And that is really something that not too many leaders on either side would be able to pull off. We don't know if he will manage to do it. But, you know, keep in mind that this is the same Mitch McConnell who managed to get a lot of suburban Republican voters around cities like Philadelphia interested in voting for Donald Trump 2 years ago, partly because he made the future of the Supreme Court a huge issue for voters, particularly conservative voters who care about this a lot, when he withheld a seat that Democrats were trying to give to Merrick Garland, and basically kept Garland from having a hearing or a vote for 10 months. And that really convinced enough suburban Republican voters that this was going to be a key issue in the elections, that even if they weren't that fond of Donald Trump himself, some of them, enough of them, went to the polls and cast their ballots for him. So this is someone who is always playing the long game, and the fact that he has been so forceful all along has been really a strategy to try to keep things on track. Never show weakness, never show that you're concerned that things might fall apart, no matter what kinds of discussions you're having behind closed doors. Always in public show that you're going to bring this to a close and you're going to be successful.
Nancy, just stand by. I just want to play for our viewers briefly a soundbite from Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who says he's ready to vote on Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation. He made that remark on Capitol Hill just a short while ago. Let's play that and we'll have a chat.
The FBI is done. They interviewed 10 witnesses. They followed leads from interviews that made sense to me. It's a complete report. It's a background check. I'm confident the FBI did a good job. They were not hindered in any way. The focus of the background check was on credible allegations before the committee. I was looking for certain things to be answered by witnesses. I'm more confident than ever that what the committee found is held up and then some. The main thing for me is that you need to go to the FBI and you need to ask them, did they feel like they were able to do their job without interference? And I think the answer is yes. They interviewed over 150 people have been interviewed throughout the course of Brett Kavanaugh's life. To those who suggest he had a problem like this from prior interviews, no evidence of that. That's all manufactured. The senators who requested the supplemental FBI background check got what they requested, and I am ready to vote.
Are you confident, sir, that the senators you mentioned, Flake, Murkowski, and
You
Collins,
need to talk
get
to
what they
them.
want?
I'm confident that the supplemental FBI background check was done professionally, was done without interference, and it validated, in my view, where we are. But you need to talk to them. The idea of the FBI looking at the committee's work product made some sense. I didn't need it, but it's done, and it puts a stamp on it that's different than it was before. You need to go to these three who have, in good faith, tried to find out what happened here and what's best for the country. 150 plus people have been interviewed over a 20-something year period. I have personally known him for 20 years. Not a close friend, but a professional relationship. The Brett Kavanaugh that I knew before the committee is the Brett Kavanaugh I know now. The only difference is an effort to ruin this man's life. I am ready to vote.
All right, you just heard from Senator Lindsey Graham. No surprises at all, although I will say for him to suggest that he didn't need the FBI report completely discounts the allegation of someone who says she has survived sexual abuse. But let's take you to the floor of the Senate where Senator Chuck Schumer is making some comments.
Again, Mr. Leader, Are you accusing Dr. Ford of engaging in the politics of personal destruction? He talked about people being intimidated. Again, Mr. Leader, are you accusing Dr. Ford of intimidating the Senate because she had the courage to come forward? And he talks over and over again about the outrageous smear. Mr. Leader, it's about time you came forward and came clean. When you say outrageous smear, you're really referring to what Dr. Ford said. But you can't say so, because everyone knows that kind of rhetoric would be outrageous. But it's her testimony that got this whole thing going. Her testimony required by one courageous Republican who said he wouldn't just rush things through, as Leader McConnell attempted to do. And that's why there was a hearing. Not any Democrats, none. I said yesterday that the leader is telling one of the greatest mistruths I've heard on the floor, that Democrats have delayed. Again, Mr. Leader, what power do we have to delay? Isn't it true that you set the time and place of hearings, or your committee chairs do, and you set the time and place of when we vote, with no effect from the Democrats, no influence by Democrats? If you've delayed, Mr. Leader, it's because you've delayed. If there's been delay, Mr. Leader, it's because you've delayed. But ultimately, Dr. Ford came forward and won America's hearts. And our Republican colleagues were upset because that might derail their headlong rush to put Judge Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. Led by Judge Kavanaugh at his return testimony, and by President Trump and by Leader McConnell, they've tried to misdirect the whole issue away from Dr. Ford, who is the cause, the reason we are debating all of this, and towards other bogeymen, many of whom happen to be Democrats, coincidentally. It's wrong. What our Republican friends are doing, what my dear friend the leader is doing, is demeaning to Dr. Ford. And demeaning is the last thing Dr. Ford and others who have gone through what she's gone through needs now, or deserves now. So I would say to the leader, if you're talking about partisan histrionics, if you're talking about politics of personal destruction, if you're talking about being intimidated, if you're talking about outrageous smears, you are really accusing Dr. Ford of all those things, not anyone else, because she is the reason we are all here in this type of discussion. And no Democrat importuned her to come. No Democrat. Senator Feinstein tried to respect her wishes and not make it public. That was not a political instinct, that was a human instinct. As I understand it, Senator Feinstein's staff called each week and said, do you want to go public now? And Dr. Ford said no, and Dianne Feinstein respected it. Now, because she did that, our Republican friends are accusing her of manipulating. Manipulating what? Dr. Ford's desire to keep this private? And we heard what Dr. Ford said. She wrestled with deciding whether to go public. She knew the damage it would create for her family, for her life, her very life. But she decided she had an obligation to come forward. She decided she had to. I believe her. A large number of Americans believe her. But even if you don't believe her, and you choose to believe Judge Kavanaugh, don't demean Dr. Ford, which is exactly what you're doing. It's a shame. It's a low point in a headlong rush to get somebody whose views are out of touch with the American people, who would, in all likelihood, greatly limit women's health care and women's right to choose. who would greatly constrain health care, who would allow the president to this overreaching president to overreach with no constraint. Dr. Ford seems to be a casualty along the way in terms of the name-calling, the nastiness, and the viciousness. Now, they don't say it's Dr. Ford, but make no mistake about it. It's her they're talking about, because it was only she who brought all of these things up, not Democrats. Democrats didn't put words in her mouth. These came from the heart. Now, I'd make three final points about the documents that have been released late last night. First, we Democrats had many fears that this would be an all too limited process that would constrain the FBI from getting the facts. Having received a thorough briefing a few minutes ago, our fears have been realized. Our fears have been realized. This is not a thorough investigation. According to Dr. Ford's lawyers and Ms. Ramirez's lawyers, there were many, many witnesses they wished to be interviewed, and they said they were not interviewed. They should have been. Why not? And what limits were placed on the FBI so that they couldn't do a full and thorough investigation? The word is it was the White House, importuned by some of the Republican Senate staffers here. Well, the White House has two choices. They can admit it, or if they deny it, they should at very minimum make the directive that they sent to the FBI public. If the White House didn't limit what the FBI normally does when they do one of these background checks, it sure seems they did, given what the limited number of witnesses, or there's so many witnesses who weren't called, who should have been. Make it public. Let the American people see whether it was truly limited or not. And what else should be made public are these documents that we're allowed to look at. First, again, the idea that this should be full and thorough and open, available, is once again belied by the pettiness of the Republican side in the White House. There's only one document for 100 members to see in the course of a day. That's very hard to do, and there's a lot of documents. There's only one copy of these documents. Why weren't there 10 copies in that room? What the heck is going on here? But it's just a pattern of limiting access to facts, limiting access to truth, limiting access to what the American people ought to know. And so I reiterate my call, particularly after receiving a briefing about what the documents contained, that they be made public. Obviously, there has to be appropriate redactions, and there should be, to protect the privacy of those who were interviewed. But there's no reason on God's green earth that those documents can't be made public. Let the American people decide. Leader McConnell said from the very beginning to the effect he's going to rush this through, starting with not releasing documents, followed by constraints from our Senate Republican colleagues on what should be, on limitations on the FBI's ability to do the new background check, all the way to this morning with one document in that room. The White House and the Republican side here in the Senate has attempted to rush this through, regardless of the facts. It's wrong. It jaundices relationships between the sides in this body, which we all want to be better. It hurts the agencies involved, the reputation of the FBI, and above all, it hurts the Supreme Court and the American people. Make no mistake about it once again. If this process had been open and fair, maybe the outcome would be different, maybe it wouldn't, who could tell? But at least there'd be some respect for the process. That hasn't happened, and that is very bad for this body, for the Supreme Court, and for these United States of America. I yield the floor. The absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
All right, so we just heard from Chuck Schumer. It looks like Senator Kennedy, John Kennedy, is making a statement here to the press. Let's listen in real quick.
And you are surprised why? I mean, I think the Democratic strategy here is clear. It's stall and restall. This is, as I said the other day, put down the bong if you think this is a search for the truth. This is smash mouth, raw politics. That's all it is. And I wish I didn't have to say that. I'm not saying that some people aren't in good faith. They are, I think. But there are many who their mantra and their whole philosophy of this is just win, baby, just win. Doesn't matter who gets hurt. Dr. Ford, doesn't matter. Run right over her. Breach her confidentiality. Ruin her family. Ruin her reputation. Judge Kavanaugh, he's expendable, they think. Doesn't matter. Destroy his reputation. Destroy his family. Whoever gets in the way gets run over. This isn't about a search for the truth. This is just win, baby, win at any cost. And I've been here for 20 months now. This is the first time I've really seen the dark side of this place. And it's not pretty. It's not pretty. America deserves better than this. Anything else? And let me say one other thing. After this is over one way or the other, there will be people spinning about who won and who lost. I attended every minute of the hearing with Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. There were no winners in that room. None. All I saw were two human beings in pain, and especially Dr. Ford. And whoever failed in their mission, their responsibility to tell Dr. Ford that she had the opportunity to testify privately to Senate investigators in her home, ought to hide his or her head in a bag. That's just unconscionable. Whoever breached Dr. Ford's confidentiality and leaked her confidential letter, they have no soul. None. Okay? Thanks, guys. See you later.
Appreciate it.
We need Supreme Court justices deflecting grace under fire. They don't have soul.
All right, so Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana there making some comments to members of the press. Essentially what we're hearing from the Republicans on Monday is that the FBI report reveals nothing new, and that means that Brett Kavanaugh can be and should be confirmed immediately. Democrats are saying, look, the whole process is rigged. We don't have enough time to conduct the investigation or the inquiry. There was not enough time to talk to other folks. And the question becomes this handful of senators that are on the bubble there, what are they going to do? I think, though, Caitlin, we are already starting to see a narrative emerge if you're a Republican. If you're a Republican, it's that this is what they asked for. This is what those senators in good conscience asked for. Senator Jeff Flake, Senator Susan Collins. We gave it to them. And I was ready to do this last week. I was ready to do this 2 weeks ago, but they wanted to check into this. And so we let them do it. Let's vote. And the Democrats are going to say, and as you've already heard from Chuck Schumer, that it's not politics. You just heard John Kennedy. They're going to say it's not politics. This is a woman who, like many women, came forward about something that is horrific, that has happened to her and that has happened to other women in this country. And what you're essentially doing is discounting her allegation by saying that she's somehow a political pawn. You're discounting the pain and the suffering that she has by saying that somehow she's a Democratic operative who was, in place to take down Brett Kavanaugh. That's the narrative. Those are the two competing narratives.
Right, and that's why you hear Republicans focusing over and over again on the process, right? And that's a way for them to at least publicly say that we feel for Ford, we feel for Kavanaugh, and that Democrats did a disservice to both of them, as you heard Kennedy say there, by the way they went about this. You see Republicans already airing ads in competitive Senate races, focusing on the process, and they feel like that is the way to appeal to people. You're going to have this back and forth between Republicans and Democrats on the same committee who have viewed the same document, presenting two different accounts of what happened and what should happen. At the end of the day, though, Republicans control all of the movement on the floor because they control the Senate. And you saw Mitch McConnell is very eager to vote. You see a lot of members of this committee very eager to vote and get this behind them. They're also fueled right now by polling showing enthusiasm has increased by about 12 points, according to an NPR poll that was released yesterday, among Republicans. It's really important for Republicans because even though they're in power, they have not really found an issue that really motivates their voters to turn out and say thanks. They have to find something that motivates them to turn out and be angry about the other side. It's difficult to do when you're in power because you control everything. But on this particular issue, they've found it. And the question is whether they can sustain that moving forward. The other thing is I'm really interested to see what Susan Collins thinks of this report, whether she thinks this was done fairly, whether she is accepting of the results here, because, of course, she is the most important voice on this at the moment.
And also thinking about some of those red state Democrats and whether or not it's safe for them to vote right now. Individually, they're trying to maintain their seat, and if there's overwhelming Republican support, then they don't really factor in how they vote. But I imagine that no one wants to be like the deciding vote in this sort of thing.
It factors in for their reelections, right? If you're Joe Manchin.
And we're seeing polling out in some of these races that shows, North Dakota, Fox poll came out yesterday showing almost a double-digit lead for her Republican opponent. And remember, she crossed the aisle last time and voted for Neil Gorsuch. That's why we're paying attention to her. We're paying attention, of course, to Joe Manchin, who also voted for Gorsuch and comes from a state that Donald Trump went overwhelmingly and where you could argue he is his most popular. So, this is a difficult position, and this is also why Republicans are eager to have a vote on this, because they believe that they can corner these red state Democrats, and even if they don't vote with them, they're kind of anticipating that they don't, so that they're able to capture that vote in ads, run it in places like Montana and Indiana and North Dakota, West Virginia, you name it, and say this person was against Kavanaugh, was against the Trump and Republican agenda. How do you feel about that?
So speaking of Collins, we actually have a statement from her. We weren't able to get her on camera, but here's a statement from her. Collins, it appears to be a very thorough investigation, but I'm going back later today to personally read the interviews. That's really all I have to say right now.
Okay, so that seems like she's trying to get to yes.
Yeah.
And that's also what we have to consider about a lot of these Republicans. Remember, the reason that Republicans have united around Donald Trump was mainly because of the ability to appoint Supreme Court justices and shape the benches around the country on a federal level. Susan Collins has been talking favorably before these allegations came out, was talking pretty favorably about Kavanaugh. Remember, her one sticking point, or one of her sticking points, was the issue of Roe v. Wade. She expressed confidence that he would honor precedent. She expressed confidence that the court wouldn't overturn health care, which is another key issue for a lot of these folks. So the investigation, as we were talking about earlier this morning, could provide that political cover. The FBI probe couldn't provide that political cover for those Republicans who were wanting to get to yes, but were very concerned about the backdrop of these allegations.
So as you said to us during our conversations when we were not on camera, this may ultimately, and I think Nancy pointed out that for Leader McConnell, this action, having the FBI do this investigation, ultimately was coalescing for Republicans. Even if you're not a fan of Donald Trump and you're a Republican, you came out in support of Brett Kavanaugh because you felt that he was being unfairly treated, he was being railroaded, however you want to characterize it. The question that I have then, so it's a win for the Republicans if he is nominated and if he is confirmed, but what happens to moderate women in the midterm elections? What happens to moderate women going forward? What happens to those? Because we know the base is strong, and we know that Donald Trump and remains popular among Republicans. What happens to those people that are undecided and don't like some of the things that they've seen coming out of the White House?
Right. Well, our CBS battleground tracking poll showed about a 12-point difference in the gender gap favoring Democrats in terms of their views on Kavanaugh. Women are playing a critical role in this election, especially women in the suburbs and districts that are going to be very competitive in November and could sway balance of power in the House, if not the Senate. So women have been the focus of all of this. And of course, this comes against the backdrop of the Me Too movement. You're seeing a Time magazine cover this week with Christine Blasey Ford illustrated by her own words. It's a very powerful cover. We've seen women running for office in record numbers, and that record number has favored Democrats more than Republicans. And you see a lot of candidates really playing up that on the campaign trail. But as we know, women are not a monolithic group, of course, and Donald Trump talks a lot about how he won Republican women, white women. He says that he won women in general, but that's not true.
No,
he
42%
did win,
of white women.
Right, he did. So Republicans are, kind of factoring in the idea that the Trump administration has so alienated some of these more moderate swing voters that they're already kind of in the hole, right? They have to, the kind of key strategy point at this point is to keep the base excited, animated, and incentivized to actually turn out and vote. That is the focal point right now, and they believe at this point in time, and we're in October, we're still a month away, that they believe in this point of time, this is going to be a game changer in terms of momentum for them on the Republican side. Now, the question is whether that sustains.
So every time the president makes fun of a victim, like he did Christine Blasey Ford, then Republicans must be biting their nails. I mean, you saw a lot of them come out and say, I thought that was horrible what he said. They must be like, that's not going to help us. That allows them to
say it's horrible, but I'm still voting to confirm.
Well, so that'll be interesting today, right? You heard Collins, Murkowski, Flake all condemn the president's language at that, but if they vote to confirm him, he won't face a political consequence for doing so. I think we also have to think about the battle of control for Congress. The Senate map is becoming more and more competitive, but it does favor Republicans at this point, just given the states that are in play and where the president is popular, where he won. On the House side, however, they're competing on a completely different battlefield, really. They're competing in the suburbs, changing demographics, where women are playing a key role. And so, as much as the president is revving up his base, there is that concern that he further alienates folks in those districts that they need to win the House. So it really is kind of a tale of two elections in some ways.
All right, Caitlin, always great to have your fascinating insight. I know you're going to be here with us for the next couple of hours. So let's take a quick break, digest everything that's happened in the last 2 hours. There's been a lot of news in the last couple of hours, including that really horrific story out of South Carolina where David Begnaud has been getting new information just over the course of these last couple of hours as to exactly what happened in a situation where one individual appears, at least at this point, gunned down.
Police officer killed.
7 police officers and killing one of them. So we're going to check in with him and a lot more politics out of Washington. So stick around. This is CBSN.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie Green.
And I'm Vladimir Duterte. Thanks for joining us. Right now on Capitol Hill, senators are reviewing the FBI's new report on Brett Kavanaugh in a secure room. The much-anticipated report comes after investigators looked into sexual assault allegations made against the Supreme Court nominee. It was delivered to the Senate overnight, and now that report is in hand, a final vote to confirm Kavanaugh could happen as early as Saturday.
White House officials saw the report yesterday, and according to the Wall Street Journal, the White House saw no corroboration of the allegations that have been denied by the nominee. Attorneys for one of Kavanaugh's accusers, Christine Blasey Ford, say their client was not interviewed as part of the FBI review and accuse the investigators of being uninterested in seeking the truth. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says that he's ready to vote on Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation. He made the remark to reporters on Capitol Hill a short while ago, so let's take a listen.
The FBI is done. They interviewed 10 witnesses. They followed leads from interviews that made sense to me. It's a complete report. It's a background check. I'm confident the FBI did a good job. They were not hindered in any way. The focus of the background check was on credible allegations before the committee. I was looking for certain things to be answered by witnesses. I'm more confident than ever that what the committee found is held up and then some. The main thing for me is that you need to go to the FBI and you need to ask them, did they feel like they were able to do their job without interference? And I think the answer is yes. They interviewed over 150 people have been interviewed throughout the course of Brett Kavanaugh's life. To those who suggest he had a problem like this from prior interviews, no evidence of that. That's all manufactured. The senators who requested the supplemental FBI background check got what they requested, and I am ready to vote.
Are you confident, sir, that the senators you mentioned, Flake, Murkowski, and
You
Collins,
need to talk to
get what they
them.
want?
I'm confident that the supplemental FBI background check was done professionally, was done without interference, and it validated, in my view, where we are. But you need to talk to them. The idea of the FBI looking at the committee's work product made some sense. I didn't need it, but it's done, and it puts a stamp on it that's different than it was before. You need to go to these three who have, in good faith, tried to find out what happened here and what's best for the country. 150 plus people have been interviewed over a 20-something year period. I have personally known him for 20 years. Not a close friend, but a professional relationship. The Brett Kavanaugh that I knew before the committee is the Brett Kavanaugh I know now. The only difference is an effort to ruin this man's life. I am ready to vote.
And to Democrats.
All right, you just heard from Senator Graham there. So let's get straight to CBS News legal analyst Rikki Kleeman. She's joining us on the phone to provide some insights. So Rikki, all along we've been talking about this over the last couple of days as to this FBI inquiry, which isn't an investigation. They have no subpoena power. They can't compel anybody to come forward.
Different level of evidence. In fact, they're not trying to come to a conclusion here.
Right,
they're just presenting information.
Right, and so I mean, it's to be expected, I guess, that you're going to have some Democrats saying that what they saw in the FBI report suggests something that Republicans are saying is not there.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think that both sides have gone to the battlefield, if you will, and that they went in believing one thing, and they are coming out believing the same thing. So if you go into something and you're looking for confirmation of your own belief, that certainly the Republicans are easily able to say, look, Democrats, plus Jeff Flake, wanted this investigation by the FBI. They got it. And what did it show? Nothing that we didn't know a week ago today. The Democrats, on the other hand, are saying, well, wait a minute. the investigation that we got was not the one we thought we were going to get. And so their position hasn't changed. And ultimately, we're coming down to the votes of 3 senators, Collins, Murkowski, and Flake, and perhaps, in addition to Joe Manchin, another senator on the Democratic side running in a red state. So nothing has changed in a week. It is just the stakes seem to have gotten higher.
Yeah, because the truth of the matter is we really don't know what this investigation or probe or enhanced background check really was about. We know that the White House determined what the scope of it was going to be. There was a suggestion that it was going to be limited to Blasey Ford's accusations, but then we find out that they never spoke to her, they never spoke to Judge Kavanaugh, but they spoke to another accuser about her accusations, about him exposing himself at a party while they were students at Yale, but then, according to her, never spoke to any of her witnesses. There were 9 people that the FBI spoke to. I can't imagine who those 9 would be because we can't really figure out what they were looking into.
Right. Well, the theory would have been that they were looking into the accusations of Dr. Ford and whether or not there was corroborative evidence, of which apparently there was not. And I don't see why anyone expected there to be, on the basis that the witnesses who Dr. Ford had talked about were people who did not remember the event. The fact that they went on to the second accuser, Deborah Ramirez, which I think they should have done, but they should have gone on to the third accuser, which was Julie Swetnick, no matter what the president or others have said about her, just to clear the air. The best thing about an FBI background investigation is that it should find nothing that would prevent someone from becoming a Supreme Court justice or a federal court judge, which Judge Kavanaugh already is. So if anyone should have welcomed the FBI investigation, it would have been Judge Kavanaugh, if Judge Kavanaugh really believed that it would show that he had nothing to hide and that he was well qualified to take this job, and no one would say anything different than that by virtue of corroborating any of these women. But I assume, though I hate to say it, I assume we are going to find out a lot about what happened in the FBI investigation, because no matter what efforts the instructions are to be able to keep this all confidential, the idea of one copy, the idea that it can't be shared, the idea of having the senators read it one by one or in groups, in order to not have anything about it to go out into the public. And what I say, I shudder to say, is that I do believe that I may work for CBS News as a legal analyst, but I certainly believe both as a lawyer and in the world of journalism that there are some things that should not be leaked. And I know that may be contrary to what the media may want, but that I do have a strong feeling about leaks. But you know this is going to get leaked. There's just no doubt in my mind about it.
All right. Ricky, we're going to check in with you in just a bit because I think we have Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey making some comments about this. Let's listen.
Person who's making the allegation who has given you a list of people that either saw that or could corroborate what she said. Did you interview all of those people? And if the answer is no, then what kind of investigation is this?
But can Democrats do anything at this point?
Again, they've always had the numbers. And to ram this through, clearly that's what seems like they're now going to try to do. And I'm hoping that people of good conscience and good faith will ask the same questions I'm asking, which is, why didn't you complete this investigation? Why didn't you interview relevant people to this?
Are you saying?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Ooh, my arm is getting dark.
All right. So Senator Cory Booker basically asking positing to the press, because he knows it's going to be played across all media outlets for the next couple of hours, the question that he wants out there, which is, why wasn't this investigation more thorough, to use the language that the Democrats are using? Why didn't they interview other witnesses? We know, Ricky, if you're still with us, we know that they interviewed Deborah Ramirez, but they did not interview the people that Deborah Ramirez says could corroborate her version of the allegation that she's made. So why?
Well, we don't know why, because we don't know what their instructions were. And that's part of the problem here. And the FBI, which I have enormous respect for, I mean, I go back for the 20 years that I practiced law on both sides, both as a prosecutor and as a defender. I have enormous respect for the FBI and also for the lengthy period of time that I've been covering cases involving them. And yet, we have seen the FBI in the last couple of years come under the most extraordinary criticism, some of it for very good reason, other reasons not so good. And we're going to be right back with, I believe, at some point, congressional hearings. Christopher Wray will have to come down, and he's going to have to explain why his agents did what they were told, I assume, and did not go beyond the scope of what their instructions were. And you have to remember, one of the things that people forget is that this is not a criminal investigation. This is a background investigation. The two are very, very different in scope. And whatever the scope is in this one, we don't know. But it sounds like it was very narrow, despite a lot of reports in the media that it looked like it was going to be big, or that certainly you and I and all of our viewers were listening from time to time of the president say that the FBI was unfettered to do whatever it needed to do. Well, it sounds to me like the FBI was very circumscribed here. That is, it was only supposed to see certain people up to a certain point. And I want to make one last point on this. There are many, many people, including the attorneys for Dr. Ford, who are in the world of saying, of course, this was all about Dr. Ford's allegations, and they didn't even go see her. Well, I understand why they did not go see her. She had testified in Congress and the world, if you will, for many hours last Thursday. And there was her letter and other statements. They had a lot from Dr. Ford. The question really was, to me, why didn't they go see Brett Kavanaugh after they got the whatever they got from other witnesses? That they did need to go visit Brett Kavanaugh and interview him at the end. That would have made sense to me. Going back to visit Dr. Ford, I understand why they did not.
So we know that senators are not supposed to talk about the contents of the document. But, you know, as we move forward towards this vote, there's going to be a lot of speech making, perhaps a little bit of grandstanding. I mean, what sort of risk would senators face if perhaps in a particularly passionate speech on the Senate floor, they released information that was in this document?
Well, they have an ethical and legal responsibility to not release what is in that document, and they know that. Do I expect some senator to be prosecuted for leaking this information? Highly unlikely. But the reality is that you ought to act according to your ethical responsibilities.
All right. Well, Ricky, we appreciate you talking to us. We're probably going to be tapping into your expertise a little bit further on in the future. Thank you.
Okay, I'm ready. Bye, Vlad.
All right. So, you know, this is something that is, the FBI investigation may be over, but as you pointed out, Anne-Marie, there's going to be a lot of grandstanding on both sides of the aisle. And I think for folks out there who are not in the bubble, whether it's the media bubble or the Washington bubble, the one thing that I hope is not, that we don't lose sight of, is that there's a woman who says something really terrible happened to her back in 1982. And to Senator John Kennedy's point, there's a man who says he's been wrongly accused, but his entire family has gone through this ordeal with him. And so it will require folks to take a step back and sort of reassess a lot of things. But I hope that that's not lost in all of this, gamesmanship, what happens next, where does the Senate go, what happens in the House, the midterms, all that stuff. But that being said, the White House does say that it does have the votes. It is confident that it does have the votes to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court after reviewing that FBI report. And how do we know that? There is a tweet. The president, in a tweet earlier today, wrote this. Quote, the harsh and unfair treatment of Judge Brett Kavanaugh is having an incredible upward impact on voters. The people get it far better than the politicians. More importantly, this great life cannot be ruined by mean and despicable Democrats and totally uncorroborated allegations.
Well, the single document was delivered overnight to the Senate, where the final vote is now planned for Saturday. All 100 senators and a handful of Senate staff have begun to review the report. Weijia Jiang has more on the response from the White House, and she joins us. So, Weijia, White House Deputy Press Secretary Shah says that the Trump administration has been talking to senators who remain on the fence. What can you tell us about those conversations?
Well, he says that the White House has been in very close contact with these senators, lobbying them, trying to talk to them more about the facts and not about all the other noise that has impacted this confirmation hearing. And there certainly is a lot of that. And Shah, even though he expressed confidence that senators can vote yes comfortably, he also acknowledged that, they haven't taken a tally of the votes since this report came out, so they can't say for sure that they have that magic number that they need to push this judge through. But he says, based on the findings of this report, that he sees no reason why those GOP senators would not vote yes. So we pressed him about why. Why are you so confident? What did the findings tell us? And will you share that with the American public? And he was very guarded to say, there are privacy acts in place, there are rules in place, laws in place that prevent him from talking too much and characterizing what the FBI has found. But he, maintains that, take it from him, that they didn't find something that should cause worry for the people who are making this huge decision.
Yeah, that's probably the last thing a free and fair press will ever do, is just take it at the word of a White House flack or press secretary. So is this considered standard to not release this information to the public, Weijia?
It is, because even though this information, this background information, is not marked as top secret or classified, it is customary to remain, for it to remain confidential. So in the future, this process can continue, and it is a long process that we have seen for so many other nominees in order to get to, the heart of what kind of judge they would be, how they would serve. Now, just because it is not going to officially become public does not mean we do not expect to see it. And so if there are leaks, that's certainly one way, the only way that we will. But, that is not out of the question. In fact, I predict we will be seeing that because, this has been such a contentious process that those, especially in favor of Kavanaugh, will want the public to know exactly what the FBI found. And those senators, perhaps, who end up voting yes, will want to justify their decision.
Yeah, that's the point. I mean, I think that, it may not be standard procedure to release this to the public, but whoever leaks is going to be leaking. It's going to be self-serving. And so the American people will never really know.
Right. Well, this limited exposure to this document is an attempt to limit the leaks. But Chuck Grassley has already issued a statement. And, once one statement comes out, someone's going to try to rebuttal. But I'll just briefly give you just a couple of lines out of Grassley's statement, which is, there's nothing in it that we didn't already know. These uncorroborated accusations have been unequivocally and repeatedly rejected by Judge Kavanaugh, and neither the Judiciary Committee nor the FBI could locate any third parties who can attest to any of the allegations. So a little window into what that document might say. And I'm sure that there will be at least one leak on the other side responding to the fact. Yeah, right.
You think?
Well, a leak and also pushback by the
Right.
Democrats who say it's unfair for you to draw this conclusion, because they will argue that this investigation was unfair because it was so limited in time and scope. And in fact, there was a new Ronan Farrow article that dropped in the New Yorker that said that, there were several people who contacted the FBI because they wanted to corroborate that second accuser's story, but they were never contacted in return, so they couldn't share the information that they had. And so I do believe this will be, a mark, because the Democrats will continue to say, even though you might not have found corroboration, that's because the process was unfair and you didn't really look for it in the way that we would have wanted you to. But, all that aside, one thing that Shah did acknowledge is that regardless of the findings, regardless of what happens to Judge Kavanaugh, he does say that he believes this will have a lasting impact on Kavanaugh's reputation and his service on the court. He said it was a really ugly process, and that he worries this could jeopardize other nominees in the future and, what they may have to go through. So he, acknowledges that regardless of the outcome, this will be a chapter in history that, really defines the president's legacy in terms of setting the court.
Yeah, and I just point out
the process, I think.
Well, the president just tweeted about the process, and he wrote this: "This is a very important time in our country. Due process, fairness, and common sense are now on trial." And I know that you and the other White House press corps members have pressed Sarah Huckabee Sanders and others in the administration to understand why President Trump had a very different standard when he was a private citizen, specifically when it came to the Central Park Five, and why he seems to have a much different standard today as President of the United States. And I know that all of you will continue digging on that, because I do believe it is relevant to the discussions that we are having right now. This is not a court of law. What is happening in the Senate and what is happening with Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh, the standards are not the same as would be in a court of law, and the president is tweeting as if it should be, sort of mixing up political and legal terms all at once, and there's a history there that needs to be examined. We got to let it go. We appreciate it as always. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
So happening right now in another area of the Capitol. This is actually the D.C. District Court. You can see protesters have amassed there. Actually, we should call them demonstrators, because there are many people who are against the appointment of Judge Kavanaugh. And there are a few people that are supporters in the crowd. Their plan is to start here and then march towards the Supreme Court. And we heard sort of maybe 30 seconds ago or so them yelling shame to someone, but also we saw some heated sort of back and forth going on between a supporter of Kavanaugh and someone who was against him. Yeah, there are a couple of people there, as you pointed out, that are supporters of Judge Kavanaugh and President Trump. I saw one man arguing with a woman. He had on a "Trump is still your president" T-shirt on, and she had one of those Kavanagh banners. Right. That she and the discussion appeared cordial. We couldn't hear it over our earpieces, but it appeared cordial, which is part of how debates in this country have always occurred. People have opposing sides, and hopefully it stays orderly and respectful, and people are respectful of each other's points of views and opinions. But that is the scene right now. And they are, as you pointed out, Marie, they're going to walk to the Supreme Court, right? That's the plan as they continue to amass here. Right now, they're outside of the federal district court. So we're going to keep an eye on this demonstration as we look ahead to this weekend, where we believe that a confirmation vote for Judge Kavanaugh, depending on how those key Senators Collins, Senators Flake, Senators Murkowski, how they are reacting to this new FBI report that only the senators and the key staff members can have access to. We do know that Susan Collins has said it is very thorough. We're going to take a break.
All right, there is mounting devastation in Indonesia where more than 1,420 people have died. That is following last Friday's earthquake and tsunami. The military and foreign troops are helping evacuate families and provide aid to hard-hit areas.
Thousands are now homeless after the quake and tsunami destroyed miles of homes and businesses. Ben Tracy is in Palu following the latest.
Nearly 70,000 people here are now homeless. There's no drinking water, there's no electricity, there's nowhere to buy food. And for 6 days now, people have been waiting for help to arrive. The Indonesian military is finally here with an army of supplies. Boxes of water, instant noodles, and giant sacks full of clothes. All of it is desperately needed at the many makeshift homeless camps that have sprung up all over the disaster zone. This woman named Endong has been here with her 1-year-old daughter Wuhan for 6 days. A tent is their only protection from 90-degree heat. They have had to drink water from the nearby river, which is also being used as a toilet. Do you have any idea of how long you'll be here? She says, "I don't know where to go. I no longer have a home." Her home was wiped out by the tsunami triggered by the 7.5 magnitude earthquake last Friday. The scars on Wuhan's face are from being rolled by the tsunami waves. She says, "It is a miracle we found her alive. I thank God she has a new life." While we were at the homeless camp, we also saw this man walking around, wearing a sign. It basically says, "I'm looking for my wife and I'm looking for my son," and he just told me that he has not seen either of them since the earthquake happened 6 days ago. He's holding out hope that they may still be alive. But this is what his neighborhood now looks like. Every single home reduced to piles of charred debris. And we're told that more than 700 homes were destroyed here during the earthquake. There is now so much debris here and so little to move it with that it's hard to imagine how long it's going to take for them to try to find all the people who are likely buried here. Sadly, they expect to find many more victims. This city holds a mass burial every day and just dug its second mass grave. Ben Tracy, CBS News, Palu, Indonesia.
All right, and we thank Ben for that incredible report. Thank you.
Well, authorities in Tennessee believe that they've cornered the fugitive suspected in a deadly crime spree. Multiple possible sightings of Kirby Wallace sent off